In Indian polity, we are going to discuss about Article 34, that is martial law and fundamental rights. Okay, so here martial law means military rule. Okay, so whenever there is a military rule, so there are some restrictions on the fundamental rights. Okay, so we already discussed about the fundamental rights. Okay, so each and every person has a right to enjoy the fundamental rights. So but whenever there is a martial law is applicable, so in that particular area people, so they don't have any right to enjoy some fundamental rights. Okay, so the entire power is in the hands of the military commander. Okay, so why the military rule or martial law is applicable? So whenever there is a failure of the civil police or civil administrators, so in that time, so the military rule will be applicable to control the area. Okay, so whenever there is a destruction or something disturbance in that particular area, so if the police, civil police or civil administration fail to control that area, so in that time martial law will be applicable to that particular area. So in that time the entire power of the area is in the control of the army commander. Okay, so it empowers, so the article 34, it empowers the parliament, so it empowers the parliament to indemnify, it means compensation any government servant or other person for any act which was done by him, so during the operation of the martial law, so for the restoration of the order or maintenance. Okay, so whenever there is a government servant or other person, so whose act was done by him in connection with the maintenance or restoration of order. Okay, so if there is no law and order, so the particular area, the power of the particular area is in the hands of army commander. Okay, so for example, so any government servant or other person, so who has done any act, okay, so with the connection of the maintenance and restoration of order in that particular area, okay, so where the martial law was in force. Okay, so in that time the parliament can indemnify or compensate. Okay, so but any act of the parliament which was done by the parliament according to the compensation to any government servant cannot challenge in any court. Okay, on the ground of contravention of the fundamental rights violation. Okay, so this important concept borrowed from the British constitution. Okay, so the martial and fundamental rights, this important article 34, we borrowed from the British constitution. Okay, okay, so in that time the civil administration run by the military authorities. Okay, so we already discussed about whenever there is a failure of the civil police or civil administration, it means day to day administration, so whenever they fail to control the territory or to run the government, so in that time the military power will be taken place. Okay, so in that time the military authorities can rule the entire area. Okay, so wherever the military rule or martial law is applicable, so the civil administration, so it means the day to day administration is also run by the military authorities. So whenever the military authorities are going to run the governments, in that time they have their own rules and regulations. Okay, so they are not following the day to day civil administration regulations or rules. Okay, it means military authorities have their own rules and regulations. As per their rules and regulations, so the military authorities can run the civil administration. Okay, so in that time, so they are running the government, running the civil administration with their own rules and regulations, right? So in that time there is a suspension of the ordinary law and government. It means there is no government and there is no ordinary law or ordinary legislation. It means so there is no rules and regulations which are formed by the government. Okay, so there are some rules and regulations which are made by the military authorities, because so the martial law means military rule. Okay, so the entire power is in the hands of military authorities, so there is no government and there is no law. So only extraordinary circumstances only the martial law will applicable. Okay, for example, war, invasion, rebellion, riot and violence. Okay, whenever there is a violence, there may be a chance to applicable of the martial law in that area. Okay, so it means very extraordinary or abnormal situations only the martial law will be applicable. Okay, so during the martial law, so the military powers they have abnormal powers. Okay, it means they are not enjoying normal powers, so they are enjoying abnormal powers. Okay, so they can impose restrictions and they can impose some regulations on the rights of civilians. Okay, so civilians means the persons who are living that particular area. Okay, it means military authorities can punish the persons who are living in that area. It means they can punish the civilians on the basis of their military rule. Okay, even they even condemn them to death also. It means they can give the death punishment to any person. Okay, so they can impose restrictions, they can impose some regulations on the rights of the citizens. Okay, so but Supreme Court held that habeas corpus, so this was the important writ of the Indian Constitution. Okay, so habeas corpus will work during the martial law also. Okay, so there are some restrictions on the rights of civilians even though we are enjoying the habeas corpus writ during the martial law also. Okay, so we are discussing about article 34, that is martial law. Okay, so martial law is nothing but military rule or military law. Okay, so whenever there is a failure of the civil police or civil administration, so the military rule will apply to that particular area to control the civil administration. Okay, so there is a small difference between the article 34 and 352. So article 34 means martial law or military rule. Okay, but whenever comes to the 352 article, that is national emergency. Okay, so the two articles are very different and martial law is not defined in the constitution. Okay, is not defined in the constitution, but only it can say that simply martial law and fundamental rights in article 34, but there is no specific or express provisions in the constitution that authorizes the executive to declare the martial law. Okay, so there is no specific provisions, there is no specific provisions in the constitution that authorizes to declare the martial law. Okay, so there is no provision relating to the executive to declare the martial law. Okay, so but the parliament can declare the martial law. Okay, so there is no specific provision regarding the declaration of the martial law by the executive. Okay, okay, so compare with the martial law, the national emergency can affect the fundamental rights and center state relations, and it can affect the revenue system, and it can affect the legislative powers, even it can affect the tenure of the political leaders also. Okay, so whenever comes to the martial law, so it can affect only fundamental rights. Okay, and it can suspend the government and the ordinary law court. Okay, during the martial law. Okay, whenever comes to the national emergency, it continues the government and the ordinary law courts. Okay, so there is no problem to the government or ordinary law courts. Okay, so whenever comes to the martial law, it is imposed to restore the breakdown of the law and order due to any reason. Okay, if there is a failure of the law and order in that particular area, so to restore that law and order in that area, so it is imposed. Okay, that is martial law. Okay, so whenever comes to the national emergency, the national emergency can imposed on only three grounds, that is war, armed rebellion, and the third one is the external aggression. Okay, only three grounds the national emergency can impose. Okay, so whenever comes to the martial law, it can impose to restore the breakdown of the law and order. It means whenever there is a failure of the civil administration, so to restore the civil administration and to restore the breakdown of the law and order due to some any reason. Okay, so just for restoring that particular law and order in that area, okay, the martial law will be applicable. Okay, and martial law is imposed in some specific area of the country. Okay, whenever comes to the national emergency, so the national emergency can applicable whole country or any part. Okay, but martial law is imposed in some specific area. Okay, and no specific provision in the constitution is defined about the martial law. Okay, but whenever comes to the national emergency, there are some specific and detailed provisions in the constitution regarding the national emergency. For example, article 352. Okay, so that defines the national emergency. Okay, so these are the differences between the martial law and national emergency. Okay, so in the next class we will discuss about article 35, that is affecting certain fundamental rights. Okay.